I'm Andy Erwin, and this is the Storytellers. This is a bucket list moment. You know, for me, when I started this podcast, the idea was to sit down with these storytellers that have inspired us. And at the very top of that list, he's one of the masters. And I'm not even going to pretend to bait people along on who it is. Today, we get a chance to sit down with Mel Gibson. And this moment has been something that I've really been looking forward to for a long time. Mel never says yes to these kind of interviews. He just, it's not his thing. So I reached out to his team and I said, could Mel do this podcast? And they're like, Mel doesn't do podcasts. And I was like, okay. I said, but what if he did? Wanted to sit down with Mel and find out about his journey, find out about what he's working on, and then find out what has inspired the stories that he's told. And he invited us over to have an hour plus sit down with him at Icon Productions out in Los Angeles. And so without further adu, would you please welcome my guest? Can't believe I'm saying this, Mel Gibson.
Hey, good morning. Or good. Yes, it is morning.
It is morning. It is definitely morning. You got your coffee. When we were together the last time in this office, I had said that there's a group of us as filmmakers that, we quit our job tomorrow just to hang around and borrow tips. And you said I didn't get these tips on my own. I borrowed them from somebody else.
Of course. Yeah.
So for you, along the way in your journey, what are the filmmakers that you've borrowed tips from along the way?
Well, I was fortunate because I came along just at the right time for a kind of a wave of filmmakers in Australia that was had been dormant for a while. And I think the first full-length feature film was made in Australia, believe it or not, in 1907.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was the first full-length feature. And it was, they still have a little bit of footage left from it.
What was the story?
It was called the Kelly Gang or something like that. So, and then they had a kind of a fruitful period in the 40s and 50s in Aussie film, And then this whole new wave kind of came back through again in the late 70s, and that's just about when I was stepping into a career.
So you had Peter Weir with Gallipoli, and you had
George Miller
those, with Mad Max.
All those post-apocalyptic road warrior kind of things,
Yeah.
So I was fortunate to just coincide with these guys and watch them.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I wasn't made for film, I was just like, I love film.
Yeah.
Of course, you watch it and everything you ever watched on old black and white TVs registered and you put it in a file someplace. But to be able to work with men of this caliber, and they were so different, So for me, it was I was like a kid in a candy store. I was the guy that never went to my trailer. In fact, they didn't have trailers in Australia.
There's something about that. Like Australian filmmaking has this blue collar grit to it, kind of this get it done. What was filmmaking like back then in the 70s in Australia?
Oh man, it was great. And I remember we weren't allowed to film on top of the pyramids.
Really?
So we went at 3:30, 4 in the morning, and we because it had to be sunrise. But I found myself dragging camera equipment up to the top of a pyramid.
Wow!
And so there were no union pigeonholes either. Everybody was just there to get it done. And so we attacked it almost like a special forces unit.
Yeah,
went up on
it's
top,
like guerrilla,
and filmed a scene from the top of Cheops.
Wow!
Which is like. And then by the time we were coming down, they were saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be up there." And I said, "You're right.
Yeah.
We're sorry."
You can always ask for forgiveness.
There you go. Forgiveness is better than permission.
Yeah.
So it's we did that, and those were the good old days of making films. And I remember that film came out, and we made it for $2 million.
Yeah.
So they put it together for no dough, and I remember it got screened here finally in the United States, and people says, "Whoa, that looks like it cost $10 million." And in those days, that was a lot of money for a film.
Right.
But back then, on the cheap, we got a lot of bang for our buck.
All right. So for you, Mel, just backing up, What was the first film that like unlocked your imagination when you saw it and you're just like,
Oh my
like the
gosh.
first one that you grabbed onto?
When I was a little kid,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even allowed to watch Superman, right?
Wow.
Yeah, because the
They're
idea,
really strict.
well, yeah, the idea that there was, that something replaced the idea of God.
Wow.
Was like anathema in our household. So
Wow.
it was, when I did finally watch Superman, it was like kind of a guilty pleasure,
Huh.
And it was like old black and white movies from the 30s and 40s,
Yeah.
and like the Marx Brothers and stuff like that
Yeah.
was on television, And then this kind of gets in you somehow, just watching it. You remember little bits and pieces. I still remember lines from those silly films. They were hilarious. Groucho was hilarious.
I heard you were a big Three Stooges fan too.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff. Just the sound effects and just the constant violence, and they're always in an industry or some kind of job where they had plenty of heavy plumbing instruments that they could hurt each other with.
I love it. So, like for you, when you stepped into it, what drew you to storytelling, like in like theater and the arts? Like,
well, I didn't really nothing. Well, I wasn't actually. I guess I was drawn to it eventually, but it wasn't some burning need that I had to fulfill in myself. It was almost by accident that I was really just at odds of what to do when I finished high school. My sister said, "No, you're pretty funny. You should probably try it for this thing. It's really hard to get into. You might get in. Just do this and see if you get in." And I got in. And it was a place called the National Institute of Dramatic Art, and apparently they had a lot of people trying to get in, but they took a handful of people, and I ended up being one of those people.
So you stumble into it. Like, what at first did you feel like an imposter, or did you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I doing here? All these other people here. They were most of them older.
Yeah.
And seemed fairly sophisticated and sure about themselves. And I later found out it was mostly bravado and
Yeah.
It was about a year into it when I realized I kind of like this. I think it's really interesting. And then I found I actually had a little, a lean that way,
So, like with that idea of being an imposter, when did it click? Like, I can actually do this. Like, I think I know what I can do this. Was there a moment that you remember where it just like clicked in for you?
Yeah, I do. And it was very peculiar. It was like a kind of a first year exercise that we had, and I found that I became so absorbed in it that I hardly remembered it, and I came out of it, and it was like I had been transported somewhere else to some other kind of weird plane of existence and exhilaration, where I became a character, and it was overwhelming. I became the character, and it's kind of scary in a weird way.
You kind of give yourself over to it?
Well, I did. For some reason, it was just I allowed myself to access that part of myself that just let it go, and it was kind of a liberating, exhilarating, very fulfilling kind of experience, and the stress level that was released was just amazing. I was. And that's the first time I noticed that kind of ability to transport, somewhere else. So that when I kind of snapped that, I didn't know what I was doing. I came out of it, and we had this very kind of old guy. He was an old actor he was born in Scotland, but he had a British accent. I guess he'd been, in London doing the theater, and he kind of like stopped the proceedings because we were getting into lunchtime and it had gone on for a long time. And he snapped me out of it. And it was, he looked around at the rest of the class and I said, "Well, I don't think we need to say very much about that, do we?" And I was like, "Well, that's a compliment from him."
If you didn't hear
normally he could trash you. Oh,
yeah.
He could shred you. So, and from that moment on, I think it was kind of a weird thing where I thought, maybe I kind of like that, and I think I want to explore that some more.
having started in Australia, making that jump across to American cinema, did that come because of everything with Road Warrior and Mad Max, or what was it that made the jump? And was that a hard transition, or how did you kind of make that transition?
Well, it was, I was still quite young, and I'd had the industry in Australia had afforded me a little success because whatever the offerings were from Peter and George, they did well, and they were well-made films, and
Both were,
and of course, if they do well financially, you go along for that ride too, and so it gave me a shot over here, and it's kind of a thing where LA's an interesting place because I mean, if you're here and you're working here and you're trying to make it here, it's hard. But if you're somewhere else and you do it, it's like they kind of like
there's some mystery to it.
Yeah, they sort of like, hey, let's pick those cherries over there.
What makes Los Angeles tick? Like, what makes the industry tick?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Like, what's your assessment? I mean, you're an observer. Like you're a thinker. Like, what's the engine behind this thing?
I was doing a film in Australia, and Peter Weir got a couple of actors who'd made it here. Like there was Sigourney Weaver and a really nice actor called Michael Murphy. And I guess he's still around. I don't know.
I haven't seen him in a while, but he was great.
He'd done some Woody Allen films. And he was a really super nice guy and very affable and friendly and great to work with. And he was like, I was contemplating, going over there. I mean, I think I'd already been there. And I said to him, so tell me about, should I, if I wanted to act over there, should I go to New York or Los Angeles? And he said, he thought about it for a minute. And he looked at me, and he was older than I was, and he'd been around. And he said, go to New York. And I said, why? And he said, well, New York's kind of a tough place. He said, the worst thing that's going to happen to you there is you're going to get mugged in Central Park.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I'll stay out of Central Park. And he said, well, I said, why wouldn't you want me to go? He says, Los Angeles. He says, how should I put this? He says, in New York, you might get mugged or, they'll say F you or, whatever. But in Los Angeles, it's kind of like they want to sacrifice you. And I said, whoa, it sort of blew my mind that he said that. I said, what do you mean? He
said, dark, but it's true.
He said, you'll find out if you go there. I'm like, what? It's like such a weird kind of,
I'll be in Central Park, please.
Yeah. And he said it and he laughed about it when he said, they kind of want to sacrifice you. And I had this notion that he had been there and had been on the chopping block or, I don't know. It was a weird kind of thing.
Well, it's like they love their narratives here to build up the new thing to get it to a certain level, and they have equal joy of tearing that thing down.
There's a lot of cutthroat aspects to it, and that's okay. It's the beast that is, you know? And if you recognize it for what it is, and just feed it enough to keep it off your back, but not actually take it home. I think you'll do all right. You come out of the mess all right at the end of the day.
So for you, like, there's a million things we could talk about with your acting career, but like specifically as a storyteller, there came a point where you've been number one on the call sheet for a while and you're the popular actor, but then you decided to kind of step behind the camera.
Yeah.
Like, what led to that decision that, hey, I want to take a risk at telling my own stories? And what challenges did that first experience bring you?
Yeah, it was an interesting story. I had an interesting experience when I was in my mid-30s.
Right.
I had always hung around the hub of filming and asked a lot of questions.
Right.
And I didn't know why I was so interested, really. I was saying, what's that for? Why are you using that lens? What's this? What's that? How come we're shooting that? He said, because you have to edit this with,
Right.
And so I was asking a bunch of questions and storing it somewhere in a box that I wasn't even aware I was storing. Collating information, putting in a file someplace somewhere in the bowels of my brain, But I was eventually involved in a film that I was producing that I had an investment in, and it was not a surefire hit. It was risky. And I thought, okay, well, let's take a risk. And, I sort of mortgaged, I put my farm on the line. I had bought a cattle farm up in Montana.
Wow.
Because I liked the land.
Yeah. It's
and I
beautiful
liked,
love Montana.
and so I was, that was on the bank was looking at that. And then the director was misbehaving. He was, and listen, I don't have any trouble admitting this, but I was like, I am an alcoholic, all right?
Sure.
So it's like, and I don't drink.
Right.
Because this is what you have to come to.
Right.
Otherwise, you
Totally
destroy yourself, And I don't credit myself with doing anything special except, realizing that, I had this affliction and asking something higher than myself to deal with it, So it was, this man was suffering a similar affliction. And, so he wouldn't turn up in the morning and stuff like that. So one day I just said, look, he's not here. I said, stick a camera on that dolly over there. We'll key light it from over here.
Wow.
And put an 80 mil lens on, and I'll walk and I'll talk. And I started to.
You just accessed that box you didn't even know was there.
Yeah, because he wasn't there, and my farm was on the line.
Wow.
So I said, okay. And he came in and said, what are you doing? And I said, get off my set, And I was pretty mean to him. I ended up loving the guy at the end of the day and understood him.
Sure.
Better than he knew.
Yeah.
And he's passed away now.
Right.
God rest his soul. But he was a great, you see. He had these wonderful things. He was a maestro. But he was just going through a bad patch.
Yeah.
And so I realized that I could actually put a shot together and light it and see, and it's in the film, And so I thought, oh, okay. I wonder if I can keep doing that for like 30 or 50 days in a row, And so it was just, a couple of years later, I put my toe in the water with something not too risky.
Was it The Man Without a Face?
Yeah. And it was, no budget, a little story, coming of age story about a kid.
Did you choose that one just to be able to kind of just focus on something that had simplicity to it to start with?
I think so. And not too over the top complex, not too many bells and whistles and
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot from that. Off we went on that adventure. And
well, with that adventure, I'm always constantly amazed to think that you went from that simple film to Braveheart. That's a massive Grand Canyon jump.
It's a big jump, yeah.
And I think, in my opinion, Braveheart's a perfect film. I think and I know you're going to probably squirm in the compliment, but it's like it's a flawless story, in my opinion. To jump from that to something like that, where did the anger come from to have a voice to say what you said in that film, and what was that transition to something that big? That had to have been difficult.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting process because it didn't happen instantly. I had read the script, Randall Wallace's script.
Yeah.
And I liked it, and we met and talked about it. And then for one reason or another, I said, no, I won't do that, because they were giving it to me as an actor, and
you thought you were too old.
I was too old for it, and I was Wallace was 25 and all that stuff, and so I kind of wrote it off because I didn't feel like a story like that big story I didn't feel secure enough to have it in I don't know whose hands.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if I don't know who's directing it, I'm not gonna, and I could pick and choose by that stage, and so I kind of walked away and did a bunch of other stuff, silly stuff, but with people that I loved, like Richard Donner, who
Dick Donner's amazing.
Yeah, and I was working with Donner at the time, and I was finishing up on a film with him, and I made 6 films with Donner.
It's amazing.
He was the best.
I've heard nothing but good things about him.
He was so great.
I guess I'm really close with Sean Astin, and I always get him
Sure.
to tell me stories about the Goonies.
The Goonies, yeah.
And he made us all on one of our films honorary Goonies at the end of it, which I still I finally showed my son the Goonies when he was 12.
Well, that's your era, isn't it?
It was my era. And he got to the end of it, and I texted Sean, and I said, I've been remiss as a father. I'm finally showing my son the Goonies. And he texted me back and said, remember, you are a Goonie. I was like, Goonies never say die.
Yeah.
But Dick Donner, just the way he worked with those kids, and he was just...
It's amazing. Very kind.
Very kind.
Really kind of like, and very talented.
Yeah.
And very humble. He would say, I'm just a traffic cop here. But that was nonsense. He was more than that.
Yeah.
And very, I mean, he grew up in TV in the 50s.
Right.
Like directing, episodes of The Naked City, and
Right.
he was doing Gilligan's Island and stuff. And like, come on, that was amazing stuff.
Sure.
And
Great timing.
And that's where he came from. And then of course he did that first Superman, which was phenomenal. I remember going to see that and being charmed out of my boots, but with the flying man,
Yeah.
which is like, and he made it real, and he made it funny, and he made it fun. It was great, great production. So
yeah, with for you, like having been around people like that, and then stepping into something that is your own epic of doing Braveheart and being in front of the camera and directing, like, did you ever get to a place where you're like, I bit way out more off than I can chew?
of course, yeah.
How did you cope with that?
Well, it's just, and you've been there, I'm sure. You get in
I haven't done a Braveheart level yet. But
well, you haven't? No.
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, there's a lot of people on the set. There was like some days there were like 3,000 people there.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, everybody's in costume, and it's like, what do we do now? And you go, okay, now I better act like I know what I'm doing.
I've had 3,000 extras before, but I have never had them dressed in full Scottish, costumes.
No.
And riding on horses.
Very few people have, I guess. Horses, everything. And feeding everybody.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was just crazy. The logistics. I was fortunate that I had a very good team to help me sort of like with the logistical nightmare that it was. And we managed to simplify it pretty well by choice of location. We started in Scotland, but we ended up shooting in Ireland because Scotland is just not horse friendly.
Yeah.
And Ireland, of course, is very horse friendly. We had the, reserve army.
Yeah.
And, all these kids, dressed up.
Sure.
And it was right next to the racetrack, right next to their barracks on the Curragh with the field, with the, so it was like you saved a lot of time and money by just that location and by the help that the Irish government gave us.
Like, what was your anchor while you were making that? Like, did you simplify it down to like, this is the heart of the story that I want to tell? Like, what kept you centered? Because there's a singular focus to that film. And for you being in front of the camera and taking on something that big, what kept you anchored in that process?
It's a good, very good question. I think, the story at its heart is quite an intimate story.
It is.
About a man and love. He loved this woman. He loves his country. He loves. He sees injustice. He loses, and he has his family taken, and then all these things are taken. He says, "Well, I'm just not going to put up with this anymore. And I'd rather be dead than not free." And I think I related to that because I'd rather be dead than not free.
Yeah.
And, so of course he died for that, in that pursuit of that freedom, which is like, it's kind of a martyrdom. He's sort of a hero, who gave it away for something bigger. I'm sure he didn't want to go the way he did. It wasn't very nice, but he did.
Yeah. I asked Randy, because I had Randall on the podcast a little while back, and I asked Randy about it, and I said, why is it that Braveheart is used as so many sermon illustrations by pastors all around the world? Like, why is it that it preaches? And he said, because I wrote it as a New Testament martyr story.
Yeah. It is.
It's got the DNA.
But it's Joseph Campbell too,
Yeah.
who's basis
Hero's
in
journey.
religion, and,
Yeah.
and it's like the hero with a thousand
faces,
faces. I mean,
yeah.
how many times have you seen that character in different eras? Either
Sure.
it's William Tell or
Sure.
Jean de Valette in the in the Siege of Malta, or all these different guys, or the Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus,
Yeah.
in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Amazing stories.
Yep.
And these guys, it's the hero with a thousand faces.
Yep.
And what are they willing to do? How far are they willing to go for their beliefs? And sort of what kind of courage that they display? And could we all be like that? I mean,
Yeah.
these are singular individuals and people who of great courage. Now, I don't know if I'm made of that stuff. But I'd certainly like to think that I could behave in an exemplary fashion if I was put to the test. And I hope I never really have to find out, but because it's hard. But I think we're all drawn to these stories because it gives us hope of what we were capable of.
Well, with that over and over again, like, what is it about, Campbell and the hero's journey, like, that is so universally ingrained in the human soul?
It's as old as storytelling, man. It's just great. And it's as old as the need that we have to reach for something higher than our existence and to be able to transcend really the suffering of our existence. Because nobody, look, some people have it pretty easy. But even people that have it pretty easy, there's a degree of suffering. And there's the condition, the human condition that they have to undergo, that we all have to undergo.
Yep.
And how do we make it through that? And it's attitude. And where do we get that attitude from? And how do we look beyond that? How do we transcend our experience here? And how do we find purpose in it? And this is, I think, this is what stories give us. Not just stories, true stories, but even just made up stories can do that, if they're well told and they ring true on some level.
When you got done with Braveheart, what was it like in that season of all the acclaim that came with that, and what was it like to stand on a stage and receive an Oscar? Like, what did that moment feel like for you?
It felt great. I mean, it was nice to be recognized, and because it was a big effort, and it was something kind of new for me. I'd done a small film, then I just decided to jump into a big one, a massive epic, and it was for me confirmation that the work I did kind of hit the mark, and it was and it resonated in other people. So, very gratifying. And I was very thankful for all the attention it got. Initially, it didn't get a lot of attention. I mean, it was really like, man, there's a lot of people that come out of the woodwork and they just want to throw mud.
How do you let it go? Like, 'cause I remember when Ben Affleck won for Best Picture for Argo, and he got up and he said, you can't hold grudges no matter how much you want to in this industry. You can't.
Yeah.
But that's easier said than done because it feels sometimes deeply hurtful.
Yeah, it is. And there's a lot of people at cross purposes and a lot of people vying for the trough. There's a lot of little piggies trying to get in there for the corn. So it is a cutthroat industry, and you cannot take it personally because it is business. But, you have to, if you love it, and I love storytelling, you got to take the lice that come with it, and there's a lot of them. And there's a lot of people that aren't good at it, but sort of, kind of come in at the end, or, I remember we made a film one time, and it was it got big accolades at the Venice Film Festival, and I produced it with the guy who produced it was he used to run Fox, and he was a guy called Bill Mechanic, and Bill Mechanic is a good dude.
Yeah, I've heard good things about him.
He's a good man. And he gets his hands dirty, and he gets he fills the gap. He's an excellent producer. And so I became pretty good friends with Bill, and we screened the film. And then at the end of the day, afterwards, the first guy to stand up was some guy who was like, we never even saw him, and he took credit for the whole thing. And we were just kind of standing there with our mouths hanging open in disbelief. It was so funny. It was, but that's kind of like the industry's fraught with those kind of people.
Success has 1,000 fathers, but failures are an orphan.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, so that was pretty funny. So Bill and I would just kind of stand there looking.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't right. For you, like, I want to kind of transition and talk a little bit about faith for you. Like, faith has always been a very big part of who you are. Like, what does faith mean to you, and like, why has that been a constant in your journey?
Yeah, well, I was raised that way, and I got it from my parents, right? And they were they believed, and I saw them, live their lives in a way that, and it worked for them. Not that it was an easy life. It wasn't. I got 10 brothers and sisters, and we went through some good times and some hard times, and some good times and some hard times, and it was always done with an attitude of trust. I think there's a verse from Matthew about look at the birds of the air and look at the, and my dad was always like, so don't go around trying to get these things. You seek first the kingdom of God, and you get all this other stuff besides, And that worked for them, because somehow you didn't even know how you were going to eat some weeks, but like,
right,
God took care of you.
Huh.
So, and not just that, but he took care of you in many ways. I saw a lot of miracles, growing up. So
Really?
It was like, at the end of the day, I think there's a very core belief that I cling to.
And what is it?
Oh my God! You have to cling to something, or you're groundless. I mean, and you have to cling to something higher, because left to my own devices, I will devolve into a chaos that is like that I won't be extracted from. And just the idea of alcoholism, for example, which is like a disease that you cannot do anything about, except for surrender to it and understand that you are completely and utterly powerless over it, and then ask for that power from somewhere else. And if you do that every day, you conquer it, or you arrest it. You never get rid of it, but you deal with it, and then you manage it, and you can be happy, and you can be serene, and you can find peace, and all that stuff that comes with transcending your nature, which is like what you try and do in the stories, and the faith aspect comes through that.
I love that.
So it's it's a suspension of your own squalor, misery, and self-pity. Self-pity's the worst.
Yeah, resentment.
Resentments. Oh my God. They'll kill you.
Yep.
And so if you hang on to stuff like that, it'll get you. And look, I'm same as anybody else. I can hang on to that stuff, and I can give it away too. Yeah. And when you give it away, it's just so much weight you don't need to carry around. Power over you.
Yeah. I've been fascinated about because I like, for us and everything that we do at our company Kingdom is about redemption, because I just think that redemption, like you said, is that age-old desire for meaning.
Yeah.
And to make sense of the pain and to find second chances.
Yeah.
And and I'm a flawed individual too. And so when I got into recovery, I would hear them talk about that, to be able to live, a life that we don't run from our regrets. We don't close the door on our failures.
Oh.
And that always like
you learn from them.
Yeah, it frustrated me, because I was like, I got tons of regret.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, if you learn from them, and I've thought a lot about, like, I loved the other day that I was reading where Andrew Garfield was talking about his relationship with you and working with you on Hacksaw.
Sure. And
just watching your journey and what had happened in your life, and just really standing behind you. And I remembered a video that I had watched years ago where Robert Downey Jr. had you present for him for an award he got.
Yeah.
And he got up on stage and gave this eloquent speech talking about when he was coming out of some of his failure and struggles and coming out of being in prison, and you giving him some work and really standing behind him. And you told him to hug the cactus.
Oh, yeah.
And if you hug the cactus, you'll come out,
Yeah.
Possibly with more empathy and humility and be able to change. Yeah. And that stuck with me for years.
Hug the cactus. Yeah, I don't know where that came from. I said it. I remember saying it to him. You got to hug the cactus, Bob. He was like, "What?" I said, "You got to hug the cactus."
You pulled that out of your butt?
It made me laugh. Yeah,
that's amazing.
And because there's things that you have to embrace the pain sometimes,
right?
Whatever your life is. I mean, I went to visit him in the joint one time.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty funny, and he was getting this disgusting hamburger out of a vending machine.
Uh-huh.
And he put this ketchup and mustard and stuff on this thing, and it just looked like plastic processed crud. And he's putting it together and he's feeding it into his face. And I say, "How can you eat that?" And he just looked up and he said, "Believe me, it's better than the crap they serve in there."
Wow.
And it's like, okay. He was funny. He even had a sense of humor in there. He's a funny cat.
Oh, I like him a lot.
No, he's amazing.
Well, I've heard that about you, where when somebody has had a big hiccup in their journey, that you're quick to reach out to people like that. Why is that? Like, is it empathy because understanding your own flawedness, or like what is?
I guess so. Yeah, and I don't know. I just if you know somebody and you grow to love them on a level, it's like you want to help them if you can. I don't, and maybe there's a fine line. You can't be too much of a rescuer.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that's a problem too.
Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, there's an empathy to that. I think because we've all, I think, been in some tight spots.
Yeah, that's part of the human condition, where either people have gone through that stuff and shared it with vulnerability, or they're just good at hiding it. Yeah. But everybody's got failures on the record.
Sure.
For you, like, what has been hugging the cactus for you? What has been that journey of where have you found redemption in your journey over the past?
I think it's conquering of self, really, isn't it? In a lot of ways, I mean, and like we have this fallen nature.
Yeah.
Like, I think Shakespeare said that flesh is heir to.
Yeah.
And it's like trying to kind of get through that with a modicum of peace.
With that desire to understand faith and redemption, the moment that you decided to do the Passion of the Christ, like, where did that obsession to tell that story come from? Like, because it seemed like something that was a destiny, like you had to do it. Like, where did that come from for you?
Sure, it came from a meditation, and it was like I used to meditate on the Passion, right, and to try and understand the reality of it, because a lot of people think it's a fairy tale, and or did that really happen? Well, yes, it did. It's it's backed up by historical veracity, and not just the Gospels, but other accounts from people. There's
historically
Roman soldiers writing back to Tiberius. This is happening. So it's that kind of stuff. So you're like, okay. What's that really about? And if we're people of faith, we have to understand what that meant. So I just began to focus on that and have it be a real thing for me, and the extent and then the readings that you get, and even the meditations and prayers and things like that you read associated with that, because it has inspired volumes of material.
Sure.
It's an unending well of in our civilization.
Yeah.
Just that one life of the God man,
Well, even like the romantic kind of the way that the book of John ends, that says, if all the stories about the Christ were the books of the world couldn't contain it. There's too much.
Yeah, if we put everything he said and did into it, wouldn't all the libraries of all the world wouldn't be able to contain the books that came from it, which is kind of like an interesting, because a lot of people hear, "Oh, it's not in the Bible; it didn't happen." But he's telling you right there, a lot of stuff happened, and we didn't write it down. I mean, the Gospels are synoptic,
right,
and therefore a lot was handed by tradition. Most people couldn't read. They certainly didn't have printing presses, so that faith was spread by the word, and he was the word, and it's like, and he didn't say go out and write the word of God to everybody. He said go out and preach the word of God, and that's the commission he gave them, so that there's a lot by word and by tradition, and St. Paul goes on about tradition and all this kind of stuff, and being able to judge good fruit from bad fruit and all this other, there's so many things, so many little prophecies and bits of wisdom given that, the picture is way bigger than most people even imagine. So you have to try and access that.
So a meditation that is something that's a constant thing for you to at what point did the meditation become like, this is a film that I have to make? Oh, like when was the switch flip for that?
Yeah. It's interesting how that evolved. I'm not quite sure, but it's like a splinter, it's got to work its way out.
Yeah.
And so it was, fester's not the right word. It was, but it just,
Well, there is something about like, because creativity is problem solving, and it starts as a splinter in your brain, and there is an element of it that when you have a story you have to tell, it's a little torturous because it gets wedged in there and you got to work it out until you're like, I got to figure out how to do this.
And it's coming out whether you like it or not. Right. It's coming. So it's like have childbirth or something.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
But like making films is kind of like having children, I guess.
Yep.
They're conceived. They, all this other stuff, and you're editing. It's like, it's got stages. Of development.
Yep.
And then you kick it out in the world. And then it gets, beat up and
it's like, don't judge my ugly baby.
Yeah.
What like so was there like, because you were making movies for other people at the time, was there film sets that you were on where you're doing the movie but you can't stop thinking about this passion idea?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was we were doing different films. I was, constantly working at that point. And the thing was just praying in the back of my mind. And I kept saying, what if we do this film? And like, on the meditations I've been having just on those 12 hours. And it's like, we do that, but like, and then don't do it in a language that anyone knows.
And that was like the way you back yourself into a corner sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the idea of doing on a dead language.
Yeah.
Like
it's not dead.
Was it Aramaic?
Aramaic.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there's places in Syria and
okay, but it's not widely.
It's not
spoken.
Not widely spoken, but people still speak it.
What made you choose to do it that way?
Yeah, I think that's what they spoke.
Yeah,
and I wanted to get to the reality of, in the same way that I wanted to get to the reality of the experience and what it meant. I wanted to have it be real in the way they spoke, and there's something mysterious and magical about doing it in that language that I think convinced people that it wasn't real. I mean, you didn't have, Jesus coming out with an American accent or a British accent or any of that stuff. Totally. He spoke in the language that he would have spoken.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, the thing that is amazing to me is watching it. I remember where I was sitting when I watched it for the first time.
Yeah.
I was at the Summit Theater in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah.
I was like about 10 rows up.
Yeah.
On the left side.
Yeah.
And I sat there, and 5 minutes in, I wasn't paying attention to subtitles or the fact that it was in Aramaic. I emotionally went on the journey.
Yeah. Well, it's a very well-known sequence, the Passion. So it's like it's in every Bible in every hotel room, and
Sure.
And it was like, so it kind of almost like a silent film in some ways, because you can watch it.
Yep.
And not have to know what they're saying, but you already know. And of course, the subtitles underneath it were good, because then, of course, you've also got the written word,
Yep.
which is
There's a power to that.
yes. There was a kind of a veracity to it that I found really effective, and people felt it. Like they couldn't even get out of their chairs at the end of it. It was. Just,
I remember it got to the end of the movie, and it was. There's only a few movies that I've been in an experience like this, but it got to the end of the movie and it was silent.
Yeah, nobody said anything.
Nobody moved,
and nobody could even stand up. They were just sitting there,
just sat there
and thinking.
Yeah,
yeah. I
did, like, as a filmmaker, when you saw, because I mean, you make your film, and then the audience chooses how they're going to respond, and it kind of becomes their film. The first time you saw it with an audience and saw that was that expected as the experience at the end, or did that catch you off guard?
Well, I knew I had that experience making it, because I was like, I found it really, every day was like, it was funny too sometimes, but it was also pretty deep. And to see that what I had been feeling and what I'd hoped for was translated into, the viewing experience, the public dreaming aspect of it. And, a lot of people have come up to me since and say, well, that, like, it changed the way I live. And I was like, really? And they went, yeah. And so it had some kind of transformative
Very much
experience for people. So
very much.
That's more than a film, I think. And so it actually kind of scared me.
Did it?
Yes, because it's if it can have that effect, it's kind of frightens you, and you realize that you have to exercise responsibility with what it is you put out there.
Right.
So I don't know. There's very powerful.
Yeah, I there was something interesting that happened. I mean, and I know your personality loves to talk the craft. You don't crave praise, so I don't want to lay it on thick, and you can squirm as much as you want.
I'm squirming,
but I feel like if you look at the history of Christianity and the arts, like, we have a deep, rich history in the arts. I mean, you go in every cathedral, and from the Renaissance, and you look at the paintings and the statues all across Europe. There's a deep, rich history. I mean, when the printing press was first made, the first thing that was printed was the Gutenberg Bible. You look at the history of, like, radio and how evangelists over the years have harnessed that.
Sure.
And then you look at film, we had a strong presence. Even, like, the MPAA was run by the Catholic Church up until, like, 1968.
Yeah.
They called it the Legion of Decency.
Right.
And somewhere in the 60s, when that was given over to a secular organization to run, like, the church as a whole just decided movies are bad. And there was a faction of it that kind of withdrew our seat at the table. And it's like, that's just not what we do. And I think that there was an atrophying that happened for decades on stories of faith. Sure. And I know that you didn't seek out that mantle. In fact, you said it scared you when all of a sudden, like, you created this thing that you didn't expect to be the religious experience that it was. You just wanted to create some sort of contemplative journey that had impacted you and do a work of art around it. But for a lot of us that have gone on to do stories of faith, we trace our roots back to that moment, sitting in a theater watching The Passion of the Christ, because there was a group of us, there's probably about 10 of us that are doing it now. Yeah. That was the first time that we were like, oh, we can express what we believe. Yeah. And we had atrophied, so we had to figure out this art form and figure it out along the way. But it was a flag that was planted on the ground through that story.
Yeah, it was strong. It was a very bold, and it created a lot of controversy at the time. I mean, there were people that was like, he made it up. I didn't make it up. It was literally that. I didn't stray from any orthodox telling of the tale. But it's good to see that it spawned a kind of a movement, which hopefully is more than just profit motive. Yeah, because I didn't expect to make any money.
No, and it was a labor of love.
Yeah, basically. And I thought I'll just be happy to break even. And but a lot of people wanted that experience, and I think you can continue that experience.
Well, that brings us to this, like, because the idea of, I mean, a hero's journey, there's always the dark night of the soul, and then there's the emerging from the cave. That's literally the resurrection.
That's it.
So, like, where are we at on
Right.
finishing the story?
Yeah, well, you gotta, of course, that's been working its way out too, and that took longer because that's a bigger story.
It is. I mean, we talked about it here in this office last time. It's like it all hinges on the resurrection.
Yeah, and of course, like the suffering and the mystery of suffering and that aspect of sacrifice for mankind is one thing, but it's like, what are the fruits of that?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a way bigger idea, and it's just more complex, and you have to ask yourself the question, or there's a question that needs to be asked and hopefully answered, is that I don't think there's anyone, even the most agnostic of us, that doesn't sit there at night sometimes and go, there is such a thing as evil and there is such a thing as good.
Mm.
And the two are warring, whatever
But
it is.
just
It's
like how important the resurrection is in that battle of good versus evil, and then the responsibility. Like, do you feel the weight and of
that, of course,
taking on that story?
And the question and what I hope we can answer is, why are these huge realms, good and evil, slugging it out for the souls of mankind?
Yeah.
Why are we even important in that process? Why? And this is one of the questions I'm going to try and answer. I don't know if I'll get there, but I'm certainly going to have a crack at it. And you have to be prepared to fail. So, but I'm kind of excited about this, about the question and about trying to answer it.
Yeah,
which is it's a big question.
I mean,
why are we here?
I think that it's a question that I'm excited to see how you attempt to answer that, because
man, I don't know. I'm in the dark too.
Yeah,
like it's just I'm going in.
Yeah. So stepping into the resurrection, like those questions are really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it does all. I mean, the resurrection is what radicalized a group of very common people to go out and shake the world upside down.
Yep.
Like, and die horrific deaths.
Sure.
Like, and
nobody dies for a lie.
No, you don't. You don't continue like out of benevolence for a friend or somebody that you respect, or even a leader, unless you're absolutely convinced that they conquered death.
Well, yeah. So, yeah, to go out and do something like that, it had to make an impression on people, to go out and evangelize the world like that, which they did.
Yep.
And died for it.
Yep.
Indeed.
Like, I don't want you to give away anything, but is it imminent? The sequel?
Yeah. It's written. And it's an acid trip.
Dude, if you want to crack open the script and read a few pages, I won't protest. We'll take the time. I love that it's so hard to put you in a filmmaking box.
Yeah.
That you tend to explore different things, and it's really interesting. And so, your new film, I had a privilege of getting a chance to watch it. It comes out January 24th, Flight Risk, and so Lionsgate, who we release our movies with, produced this one with you guys, and so I got a chance to see a screening of it the other day, and it's a fun ride. Like,
it is. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun, and it feels very 90s throwback action. It's kind of like Speed meets Lethal Weapon. It has that fun and that feel, but also it has a surprising amount of heart at the end that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about like what drew you to do this story, and I've got a lot of questions about the making of it because it's fascinating. But what made you say yes?
We're in an era at the moment in filmmaking where it's like people are we're in a different landscape altogether, filmically, than
Yeah.
where I grew up.
Yeah.
The streamers are there.
Yeah.
You know, they're starving for content.
Yep.
A lot of what you see is just like, why did they make that? Some of it's good, some of it's not so good.
Yeah.
But there's all different degrees, and it's come down to a point where you have to make it faster and better with less time, less money. And how do you hold your own in that landscape of filmmaking? Like, how do you? So I thought I'd just jump in there and try something. It took 22 days to shoot.
Man,
and
it's fascinating.
And see if you could pull something out of it. And I think, you know, as always, you know, you have to entertain.
Yeah,
you must. A cardinal sin of making a film that bores someone.
Yeah, because there is a responsibility. Because
yeah,
you know, I don't think film is about expression in its pure sense. It's about communication, and it has to be who are the people buying tickets, and what are the experience that they need to have to make this worth their while.
Sure,
there's a trust there,
and you got to be an audience member.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost,
I'm a lifelong audience member.
Me too.
And I think you have to have that. You can't make a film for yourself. You have to make it. If you're going to cook a cake or bake a meal, you're making it for other people.
Yeah, to be enjoyed
and to share.
Yeah,
and you want them to dig it, and you want to enjoy it yourself if you have a bite. So, you know, it's always it was a little bit of a challenge. I'd never been put on a spot like that. Like hey, do it in 22 days and make it fun. And fortunately, I had some really good help.
Yeah,
I had like Wahlberg and Michelle Dockery and Topher Grace.
Yeah,
and a few other artists. You know, you just hear voices and stuff, but it's like
right.
It's for me, it was a real treat. And you know, when we finished it, it was like, whoa, it's only 85 minutes long.
Oh, it's a fun ride. Like
yeah,
it's you know, for the people that haven't seen the trailer, go watch the trailer. It's amazing. But you know, it tells the story of this, you know, air marshal that's transporting a prisoner, and then the pilot that's contracted to take them from, is it Alaska? So it's like a bush pilot that's taking them to the city. It turns out to maybe not be who he said he is.
He ain't going to the city.
And he's not going to the city. He's not. He's not. And Mark Wahlberg plays this guy with such, I mean, he chews the scenery in the best sense of the word. It's like,
he's great.
It feels like full Dennis Hopper. It's so much fun.
Yeah, he let his dark side out.
Yeah.
Like he
yeah, it's like once you let it out, I don't know how you reined it in, because like he goes. Well, in fact,
yeah, we had to sort of ply him with Wahlburgers.
Yeah,
keep eating I get back in there.
In there, throw him some red meat, let him gnaw in the back of the plane. But the couple of things, because like there's a bunch of ways I want to go with this. But first, you shot it on a lot of it, almost all of it on volume stage, which you know, like. You know, you've always shot a lot of practical locations. So all of a sudden being in this technology where you've got a plane on this gimbal that can move back and forth, and you've got all the footage around these screens that make it feel like you're in the environment. For those that don't know what that is, it's the technology they use on like shows like The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
And so stepping into that and then locking yourself into a plane of 75 minutes in real time.
Yeah.
And like when I heard that, again, it was almost like hearing, you know, when I heard you were going to do The Passion of the Christ in Aramaic, it's like, you backed yourself in a corner, and I was like, how do you keep this moving? But it's an 85-minute wild ride and a dance between these three great actors in a plane, and it never slows down, and it just is always interesting. And I don't know how you did that dance, but it's amazing.
Well, you keep it moving, but you know, a lot of the credit goes to like everybody that worked with me on it. I mean, first of all, we had a good screenplay from a kid called Jared Rosenberg, who he had never had a film done. Wow. And he was kind of like a kid. He's a kid to me. He's probably 40 or something.
Yeah, I'm 46, Mel.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, right. Okay. He's a kid to me. But so he was full of enthusiasm, and it was a script full of that exuberant kind of like young writer energy that we both sat down and we sort of scratched our heads and looked at it and said, how can we make this even cooler? And we did. We made it cooler and a little edgier and a little funnier. And, and then you got these other people to help. And then the editor is the same guy that edited Braveheart.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. Steve Rosenblum. And he kept it tight. And it's like a tight little thriller.
Yeah.
So, he has a wonderful story sensibility, Steve.
Right.
Like when we read the Braveheart script, he said, you got to edit this now. And I'm like, why? He said, because you'll end up editing at the end and cutting and leaving a bunch of stuff on the floor if you don't edit it now.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. So that's always been he taught me a lot about that. That's always been my attitude.
Cutting paper is the cheapest way to save money for your film.
You anticipate what the cuts might be.
Yeah.
And try and, and then, man, there wasn't a spare ounce of fat on this thing. It was just like, we gave it to Steve and we put it together. It was like, whoa. And it was like 82 minutes. And I was like, wow, it's not long enough. And he says, it's as long as it needs to be.
It's perfect.
And you're like, and then we looked at it and we said, it starts off with scene 2. I said, yeah, it does. It starts off with scene 2.
So you need to do scene 1?
So I had to go back and reshoot scene 1.
So the cabin scene at the beginning,
it's a reshoot. And because
you have to get to know the guy that you're transporting.
It just needed scene 1.
With the cast that you picked, it caught me off guard of like who you selected.
Yeah.
Because it was you showed tones that I'd never seen in their body work.
Yeah.
So you got Michelle Dockery from Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
My wife is obsessed with Downton Abbey. She goes to sleep to it every night.
Michelle is a finely tuned instrument.
She is so good in that.
Like
I was shocked. Like she's as an action heroine and as the heart and soul of the movie. There's one scene, and I won't give away what happens, where she goes through a gamut of emotions.
Yeah.
Like you take her on a roller coaster or she takes you on a roller coaster. And I don't know how you got the texture because you held the shot for the majority of the performance moment.
Yeah.
And she goes from, all the stages of grief, like, and then ends in this place
to
of
rage.
To rage.
Yeah, wow.
And I was watching that and I was like,
it's cool.
It's a masterclass.
Yeah. She's great. She's great. And she does it effortlessly, and it's and she expresses very much with very little. You got to be able to express something that's not only subtle and means something, but true.
Right.
And that's who she is.
Yeah, and there were tones of Topher's performance that I've never seen in his body of work either.
No,
like
because he's the funny guy.
Yeah, he's the funny guy, and that's his go-to.
Yeah,
but that can also be a kind of a stiff arm to not let the audience in. And when he finally gets to different points where you see a different shade of him, I had not seen that before from him. It was really interesting.
Yeah, he's great.
And
he's fantastic. And then Mark, of course, is like he let the little monster out.
He did.
So it's like
what took my breath away, and I didn't know if you guys were going to reveal this in the trailer. So it's in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler.
Yeah.
But his hair.
Oh yeah.
When he went and shaved his head, did people know he was going to do that?
Well, no, I heard that he was going to shave his head, and I was like worried about it. I thought, what's he talking about? And then he said, I wanted to do this like bald, and I said, let me think about that. Let me sleep on that overnight.
Yeah.
And so he had this whole thing where he comes out with a hat and a wig and stuff, and then it gets knocked off.
Yeah.
And he's bald, and I thought that's genius.
It's genius
because it's just so like
it's so unhinged.
What is he doing?
And Topher's reaction to that moment made me like spit my drink out. I was laughing so hard.
Me too. When he did that, I nearly died.
It was so good.
But it's like that's almost like the funniest part.
Yeah,
it's like Topher's reaction to this guy's hair coming off. But and then I slept on it and I came back and I was wholeheartedly behind it. I thought this is just the greatest idea.
It's so good.
Yeah. And I hadn't thought of that, but Mark cooked that one up, so that was pretty fun.
Yeah. I've always been impressed with the performances that you get out of your actors, and I've just kind of watched how you interact with them. And to be able to go from something like Apocalypto, which is an incredible chase film, but with working with non-actors that you cast like fishing dock workers and different things like that, and to get such a great performance from non-actors. And I've thought the same thing about like what Danny Boyle did with Slumdog Millionaire and things like that, where it's just like getting performances like that, or working with really amazing talent, but you can get a bunch of good actors in a movie and not have a great performance because they never coalesce into kind of a cast.
Yes.
Like, what's your philosophy to getting the performances you get in your films? Like, what do you try to create on a set to discover things with the people that you're working with?
Relaxation.
Really?
Yeah. Ease, I think, is the key to every skill, is relaxation. And I try and get people to relax. Firstly, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't try and fix it. Just like,
don't insert yourself just because you need to.
Like, somebody like Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
You just say action and cut with that guy.
Yeah.
You don't try and fix anything because he's got it.
Yep.
And he's got it really well. And he did a phenomenal job.
He did.
And so if you don't try and fix the stuff that's working, you're already ahead of the game. And every now and then, if you can just like nudge it in a little direction here and there, it's good. Say, hey.
I loved watching on like Braveheart how you used humor a lot on such a serious thing, where the clown nose that would sometimes appear.
The clown nose that would appear, yes, on different people in the cast.
Yeah.
In the middle of a serious scene.
Yeah.
So it's it's just a way to break tension, I guess.
I love it.
Like there was always a clown take. There was I had Rudy, that guy in Apocalypto. He's in the tree with the jaguar, and the jaguar is like, rah, growling at him, and he turns around, he's all got to be scared, and he turns around, he's got a clown nose on. And for that shot, over the jaguar was a puppet, right?
Uh-huh.
So, you're not going to waste time with the clown nose if there's a real jaguar there. There was a real jaguar on the reverse angle. Right. He looks at it, it's right there. Like
the audience sees it, he doesn't.
Oh, yeah. But on the reverse, there's a puppet in the foreground, like dirty over with a jaguar looking at him. And it was very funny because he turns around with the clown nose looking really scared. And the idea is, don't laugh.
Yeah.
You just got to play the scene straight with the clown. and so it's pretty funny, but the guy with the puppet turns around to the camera and starts laughing. Like the jaguar puppet starts laughing. It was like one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Oh, dude. Well, we share a director of photography, Johnny Durango, shot this for you. Durango, which I still say is a made up name.
Yeah, I don't believe it.
Yeah, it's very much a movie name.
Johnny
it's like
Durango.
Johnny Utah. But like, so Johnny Durango shot this for you, and he also shoots for us. And he told me about like for the finale of the film, you had to kind of do an audible right at like that last bit of blue in the sky.
Yeah.
And the camera had malfunctioned for the drone. And next thing you know, everybody's piling into your truck.
Yeah, we didn't have a drone. We had a helicopter, and it was all teed up with the camera. And it was like we had literally an hour and a half on 2 nights to film an entire crash sequence with the plane.
Wow.
And it was like, how do we? And then the camera died on the plane. The shutter wouldn't
open.
It wouldn't open. And it was just like, oh, we have a mechanical problem. Like, oh no, because I wanted the sky just like almost dark, but like light,
just a little bit of blue.
And so we rehearse all day, and you get all the fire engines and the plane, the plane doing run throughs and all this kind of stuff. So you get it all dialed in and timing wise as much as you can all through the daylight, and then when magic hour comes, you got an hour and a half to get it.
Yeah,
and the sun's gone behind the mountain, and you can maybe mess with a few stops, digitally.
Right.
And so here we are. And the camera, it just takes an absolute dump on us, and it just won't work. And we're like, oh, there goes one of my nights. I said, we got to get something. He says, what do we got here? And Johnny says, I just happen to have this little DJI camera, which is this little thing with a 4-axis gimbal that you can just hold. You've seen them. They're pretty good.
They're
tool.
amazing. Yeah.
Nobody can say wrong.
Yeah.
Because I said, well, we don't have a camera truck. I said, but I brought my truck here. I said,
it's so punk rock.
Let's get in the back of the Ram.
It's great.
Ram, Dodge Ram. And the camera guy gets in there with his DJI, and we're driving down the runway with the fire engine chasing us, leaving, the airplane, there's the whole thing, the whole sequence. And those ended up being the hero shots of the movie.
It's incredible.
Because what you do in desperation is always kind of astounding.
There's a visceral quality that comes with it when a lot of times it's like you have to do it live. It's like there's no chance for it to do it again.
Yeah.
And in those moments, do you get when it gets crazy like that, do you get clarity or is it confusing? Is there a clarity that comes of like, we've got to figure it out?
No, you get clear, very clear. You realize you're up against the wall and you have to do something. And I got those shots and I was surprised at how good they
look great.
And I was like, okay. And then they tried to reshoot them or tried to schedule them in to reshoot them. At the end, I said, no. I said, we're using those shots because I had to really, I was attached emotionally. I was attached to those shots because of what we had to do to get them and the time we had to get. I think we got those shots in 17 minutes.
That's incredible,
and it was crazy. And we used all of them.
That's incredible. So every piece of the buffalo, it's used.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, you got to know what you're doing.
Well,
and I didn't know what I was doing, but you all of a sudden you get this. You realize you're in a bad spot, and you better just make good decisions and just do it. So, but it was fun. And kind of knowing that gives you a lot of confidence actually, because it's you can pull a rabbit out of your hat when you need to.
Do you what things are still on your bucket list of like, either roles to play or kind of genres of stories to attempt? Do you have some things that you haven't checked off yet?
Yeah, definitely. But sometimes you don't know what those things are. I mean, definitely this Resurrection project.
Yes, that's the bucket list for sure.
Is huge. And with the, you got a very narrow margin there to, although it's massive scope.
Right.
I think, it's a big challenge because you can go wrong with it.
Sure.
But again, what's the worst thing you can do? Fail. You can fail. And that's okay. People do it all the time.
I love that.
And so it's, but that's not my intention. I want to try and
give it your best.
Hit the sweet shot with it. See if I can serve a couple of aces out there.
That's cool. I wouldn't bet against you. Mel, for us, you taking the time to do this is a big deal. I know you don't do a lot of these.
No.
And
never do these.
So the fact that you said yes is a big deal.
Only for you, pal.
Oh, okay. Cool. I will put that on a plaque. But man, I appreciate it because I just think that for me as a filmmaker, I just love being around storytellers that have kind of been part of blazing different trails and just absorbing, like the same thing that you said, is liking just being the presence of some of the filmmakers you grew up around and just listening to them talk about their process.
Sure.
And I just think there's a gift that happens that is given filmmaker to filmmaker, where you have somebody that's gone a little bit farther in the journey that just as they talk, a lot of this job is absorbed. And so you taking the time to share your wisdom is a big deal. And we love it. Flight Risk is in theaters January 24th. Everybody needs to go see it because it's a fantastic wild ride.
It's quick.
85 minutes. You will love it.
It's a quick. What do they call those flights? Those there's like
a puddle jumper type thing.
It's a puddle jumper.
It's a puddle jumper. But 85 minutes. You stick the landing. It's worth the watch. So
stick the landing.
Appreciate you, pal.
Okay, thanks, man.
So that's the show. Mel Gibson does not disappoint, and I just lived up to everything that I hoped he would. Being able to sit down and just have him share where he's at in his journey. The thing I love about Mel, I've got a picture, on the wall behind me that is from when he was doing Apocalypto, and the quote that is on it is this quote where he said, "I'm not a finished work. I'm a work in progress." And I love about Mel is that he connects with the human idea of redemption in his journey and his struggle and his storytelling, that it's in the brokenness and the humanity and the flaws that he finds these special, memorable stories. It's in that kind of innermost yearning, and I think it's connected to like the empathy and the challenges of his own journey. And I think for me as a filmmaker, I'm a flawed individual, and I love the idea of redemption. And I think I love the idea of redemption in film because I need it so much. If it hadn't been for that, like, I'm a lost cause. But God loves to use those of us that are messy, that have had failures, that have had bumpy moments in our journey, to have an appreciation and a gratitude for things of substance that matters, because it's what saved us. And so I see that in Mel's storytelling, that the stories he tells are not, it's not cheap faith. It's lived in, earned, authentic faith. And so just privileged that he would sit down and share his journey, his story. His new movie Flight Risk comes out in theaters January 24th. The Thing is a fun ride. You're gonna love it. It's so much fun. Totally enjoyed it. But I'm just excited to see what comes next. I'm like on the edge of my seat waiting for the sequel to The Passion of Christ, The Resurrection. And I just can't wait to see the stories that Mel continues to tell. So for those of you storytellers out there, be inspired by the people that have gone before us, and continue to tell your stories because they're worthy. So that's our show today. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next edition of The Storytellers.
The Storytellers is a Kingdom Story Company production. It is produced by Nick Carey, with production assistance from Ben and Justin Bailey, and creative assistance from Jaron Weatherly and Beecher Proch. Our executive producers are Kevin Downs and Brandon Gregory. Social media for the show is run by the Troops and Allies team, and our music is Twisted Rooster by Tommy Prophet. Special thanks to our entire team at Kingdom Story Company. To make sure that you never miss out on any of our exciting guests, subscribe to The Storytellers for free on YouTube at Kingdom Story Company or wherever you listen to podcasts. For exclusive first looks at our upcoming films, behind-the-scenes content, and invitations to advanced screenings, join the conversation as a Kingdom Insider at KingdomStoryCompany.com and follow us at Kingdom Story Company across all platforms. As always, thanks for joining Andrew Erwin and his friends on The Storytellers.